Hi, my name is Roger, and I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, and I want to share some of my story with you. I grew up in a Christian home where we went to church every week. Every time the doors were open, we were there. We were a very religious family. My father, as a matter of fact, was a deacon in the church. However, that didn't keep me from having a warped view of God. Throughout my childhood, my view of God was that God was a very distant person. Someone that if you were super spiritual, like a pastor, deacon, or whatever, that you could communicate with God. And I know that people pray to God, but to me, God was not a personal God to me. And so I had a very warped view of God from a very early age. I was introduced to drugs and alcohol at the early age of 12 when a neighbor friend of mine, we began to experiment with alcohol. This led to us using marijuana and a variety of other things, including crystal meth and cocaine and many other things. These things seemed to light something in me that hadn't been there before. They seemed to make me more energetic around people. They made me feel accepted. They made me feel lively. They made me feel like that I was part of the crowd. What I didn't realize through all these is these very things that I was using to meet these needs were becoming a slow addiction in my life that would carry on for many, many years. I got married at 19 years old to the first person that told me they loved me. We had our first child, who was born several months premature, and he weighed 3 pounds and 13 ounces. I had no idea how to be a father. I had no idea how to be a man, and I had no idea how to be a husband. This just fueled the dysfunction in my family. I was a very controlling father, I was a very controlling husband, and I was a very controlling man. I also had this great drive to succeed. From an early age, my dad had instilled in me this work ethic. I stepped on many people, I hurt many people on my path to be a success in my career. I destroyed many people's lives through the process of trying to make a name for my own self. I brought a lot of harm to my children, my wife, and all those people that were in the way of what I felt my ambitions were to be fully successful and to be satisfied and to be the person that people would look up to as this great idol, a great person, success in the community. After 19 and a half years of marriage, it finally came to an end and we got a divorce. I was still in the midst of my addiction to alcohol, I was still in the midst of my drive to succeed, and I was a very miserable person on the inside. My children had reached the point that they didn't want to spend a lot of time with me, and my drive to succeed had put me in this position that there was so much debt in my life that I really couldn't even afford to buy a can of soda. My credit card debt had got to the point that I was actually using cash advances from one credit card to pay another credit card. I had went in debt for things like brand new boats, I had horses, I had horse trailers, I had a brand new home that I had purchased, and I just had more debt, and I was on the very verge of bankruptcy. There came a point in time when I finally decided I wanted to end it all. I wanted to take my life. I felt in my own self that everyone around me would be better off without me. Life would be better if I just wasn't here. Finally, one Sunday afternoon, after a long day of drinking, I took a 6-inch hunting knife and I stabbed myself in the heart. Several hours later, I woke up. I immediately got up and I called 911 and I asked them to come and get me and explain to them what I had done. EMS crews arrived, they had to break into my house, and they took me to the hospital where they had to insert a tube into my side to drain the majority of the blood that my body cavity had retained. I had to have open heart surgery to repair the artery, and I was told that I had to be resuscitated several times during the process. I was also told that sometime the next day that I developed internal bleeding and I had to be opened up again to repair the damage. Sometime later, several days, I woke up and I was strapped to a bed in CCU. Family and friends began to pour in. Family and friends began to pour in that I didn't even realize that I'd had. There were a lot of people who wanted to come in and tell me that God had a plan for my life. While this brought me some comfort knowing that there were people who were expressing their concerns, I'd realized the magnitude of what had happened and that it hadn't been carried out, and so reality now began to set in again. After some time in CCU, I was released to go to a regular room and then later transferred to the psychiatric ward, and then finally released to where I could go home and begin my real recovery. I began recovery physically, but I never began recovery really spiritually. I was still depressed on the inside. I still had this emptiness deep within inside me that never had been satisfied, and after about 6 months I began to drink and use again. Finally, in February of 2001, I took my last drink, and I called a friend of mine, and he agreed to drive with me to Atlanta, where I checked myself into a rehab center. When I checked into the center, I realized that I did need God in my recovery, and I knew from all my upbringing that God would need to be part of my recovery through this process. I had such a warped view of God and such a warped view of the church that it still gave me literal dread to have to go to church. But I began to go to a new church, and I found a place that taught healing, it taught grace, it taught forgiveness, it taught God's unconditional love. It taught love that I had never heard before. It began to give me a glimmer of hope that I had never sensed on the inside, and I really began to think that perhaps God was speaking to me. Perhaps I could come out of this depression. I began to set on this mission that I wanted to find out what would cause me to do the things that I had done, to go to the end of myself as I had to try to take my own life. I began to attend small groups of all kind of different varieties that dealt with healing and recovery. I would attend conferences, listen to lectures, and anything that I could find to learn what had caused me to do the things that I had done. One of the things that I began to find through this process was that God had a plan for me before I was ever born. It tells us in Psalm 139 that He knit us together in our mother's womb, that He knew us before we were ever born, and that every day of our life was ordained before it ever came to be. And God began to show me that He had a plan, He had a call, and He had a purpose on my life, just like He does every single one of us here. And I had begun to come into the purpose and the call of that plan. I had come to know a God of love, a God that has a plan for me here and now, and that after I do leave this life, that I will get to spend the rest of my life with Him in the here and after. And this was a different view of God than I'd ever heard before. This was the reality of coming into the idea that God is a personal God to every single one of us. At one point in my healing and recovery, it came to me the reality of why I had called 911. In other words, the night that I tried to take my life, why did I call 911? No one knew that I was preparing to take my life. And all I had to do was lay there and my wish would have been granted. And yet something in me involuntarily got up and called 911. And it was like God was gently saying to me that He set eternity in the hearts of man. And He has a plan and a purpose for us, no matter how far down we have fallen. It tells us in Ecclesiastes that anyone among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. That brought great comfort and healing to me, that somewhere inside of me, no matter how far I had fallen to the depths of wanting to do what I did, that God had a plan and He had a purpose. And that plan and purpose is what caused me to get up and call 911. He still wanted to show me the depths of His love for me. He has a plan for us. He is a God of restoration, and He wants to return us. He wants to bring us to that point of joy and peace in the understanding of who He truly is. He is a personal God. God has totally restored my life. It has transformed into a person that I never thought I could be. I realized that I had lived the majority of my life wearing a mask. The majority of my life was lived wanting to please other people. The majority of my life was trying to live up to the person and expectations that I thought others wanted me to be. This blinded me from the person that God had created for me to be personally. I've come in to be a new creation in Christ, a truly new creature. I love who I am. I love life. God has restored my family. I have a new wife. I have a new relationship with my children, and He has just placed so many people in my life that I get to share this life with, to live out this life that God has called us to be. He truly is a God of freedom. He's a God of restoration, and He is a God of freedom.